Happy Monday, friends, and welcome to another episode of the on.net live show, where our mission is to empower you, the .net community, to achieve more. I'm your host, Scott Addie, and I'm joined by co-hosts David Pine and Cam Soper.
Hey.
Also joining us today is guest Mitchel Sellers. Mitchel, we're super excited to have you. Could you briefly introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, I'm a 14-year Microsoft MVP. I run a software consulting company in the Des Moines, Iowa area, and I'm a regular contributor to open source projects, and excited to be here today talking about one of those open source projects two of those open source projects of mine relating to tag helpers and trying to make developers' lives a little bit easier.
Sounds great. So maybe, so tag helpers is something you mentioned, Mitchel, and I'm guessing not everyone out in the audience knows what we're talking about when we say tag helpers. I know before the show, we were talking about sharing a doc for this. Maybe if we could pop that into the chat and then kind of talk about what a tag helper is and, why you as an ASP.NET developer would care about this. Does that sound fair if we start the discussion there?
Sounds great to me.
So in the chat, there we go, the banner that's displaying. If this is a new concept to you, please do give that doc a read. I know, Mitchel, it looked like you may have had an example that would show the power of using a tag helper. Do we want to start there?
Yes, I've got that up if you guys want to make my screen visible here. Let me just zoom in just one more click on that, make it a little bit easier. There we go. Yeah, so, the one of the fun things is as ASP.NET developers, right, we use tag helpers a lot more than we think of using tag helpers, right? Every time that you make a link and you use ASP-action, you're using a tag helper to accomplish that goal. But what I was kind of showing here is we can do a lot more with tag helpers, right? We can extend them, we can build upon them. And so this is an example of if you are a developer that is using a Bootstrap layout for your forms, you have a lot of standard things that you're doing. And the standard markup, we're actually using the out-of-the-box label tag helper because we have that ASP4. We have an input with an ASP4. We have a span with our ASP validation 4. And then we have some hard-coded text. So in this example, what we do all day, every day, we're already using tag helpers. What I'm working to do is that's really repetitive. It takes a lot of time. I even have it like documented out here. It's 306 characters. And then with the tag helpers that I've created that extend beyond the default ones that are available to us, I've condensed it down into something as simple as form text, ASP4, and then any of those specific notes. With the idea of here, trying to make developers' lives a little bit easier. That's what we do with the ones that are out of the box, right? We want to be able to create those hyperlinks and have them automatically adjusted if we rename something refactor. And that's what I think really when I look at a tag helper is what it's all about, is making the developer's life a little bit easier.
So the thing I really like about this is you're adhering to the dry principles. Don't repeat yourself. You're taking something that is very redundant. You see this markup used over and over in your application. You're cleaning things up, making it easier to reason about what's really going on in the page.
Could you zoom in a little bit more? We actually do have a viewer asking if we could zoom in a little bit more.
We sure can.
So just to context set a little bit. So when we're talking about tag helpers, we're talking exclusively about Razor syntax, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So and there's a lot of tag helpers built into Razor, and what we're talking about in this case is like this example that we're looking at right here is a tag helper that you've built in your open source library.
Yep. So this is an example in our open source library. We've taken the built-in ones and we've extended those to add new behaviors to it. Also in our open source library, there's a number of truly custom ones that are not extending out of the box tag helpers, which I can show here in a little bit. The idea with this library specifically, this is our Bootstrap tag helpers. And the idea was to make life for developers that are using Bootstrap, specifically Bootstrap 4 or Bootstrap 5 for UI development, to reduce the amount of boilerplate stuff that's going on. And the fundamental start of this goes to Scott's comment about, not repeating ourselves. And what we did is we created these originally with Bootstrap 4, because Bootstrap 4 to Bootstrap 5 requires a large number of changes across the board to the way that you do forms. Well, what we were able to do is by standardizing on using our tag helper, I was able to take our tag helper from the Bootstrap 4 version to the Bootstrap 5 version, and voila, we're instantly Bootstrap 5 compatible, because the tag helper was doing all of that repeated stuff. So when Bootstrap changed, for example, form group, and I just realized now that this example is not correct for Bootstrap 5. I'll update this later today. This was switched from form group in one version of Bootstrap to MB3 in another version of Bootstrap, but it's the same for every single form field. So what was happening is I would have to manually go in and update those, or every single place that you did that would change, or form control label became form label. So every single time that you had those changes and you're doing this globally, you're doing a bunch of find and replace, which is really dangerous, as we all know. The idea with the tag helper is that logic is encapsulated inside of that tag helper. So if I'm using that tag helper everywhere, not only is my code a little bit more readable, it also makes it that much easier that if Bootstrap 6 comes out, we can make a Bootstrap 6 variant, keep the same tag names. You switch to the Bootstrap 6 version and everything rolls forward. So we've taken the time and risk to do upgrades from one version of Bootstrap to another and absolutely trim that down a ton by being able to just swap it out easily. It also lowers that entry point sometimes for developers to understand how to be consistent. Because if we want a text input, we want a select list, those kinds of things, we have those reusable components.
Another benefit that I think a lot of people might overlook is the fact that while it does save you a ton of time typing, it allows you to be consistent, like uniformly across all of your different areas that you're codifying for your UI. Like if you're doing several different forms in different places throughout your app, by using the tag helpers, you're ensuring that each of those are going to be consistent with the markup, because the underlying markup that's actually output is the same.
Absolutely. And that's where a few of the other tag helpers that we have in the collection from the Bootstrap tag helpers, I think is really true. Especially as we start looking at, we have a tag helper for modal dialogues. We have a tag helper for cards. We have a tag helper for the off canvas. Those same kind of things where there's a whole bunch of different things, especially accessibility and some of those things that developers don't always think about, ARIA labels and those kinds of things. Our tag helpers forcefully put in those ARIA items so that you don't have a developer missing something.
Yeah, and I kind of look at this as a tool you can use to onboard developers to your team more easily. You can all of a sudden recruit developers that aren't experts in Bootstrap. You've abstracted away the nuances of that framework. When the developer asks, hey, I need to create a modal dialogue in this part of the application, what exactly should that look like? How should it be styled? All of a sudden, that's not a question that needs to be asked, because going back to David's point, the consistency is built in when you're using these tag helpers over and over again.
Yeah, and it's a little bit hard to see because my indenting isn't the greatest here, but I can switch over to Visual Studio here as well. But we have a tag helper for a modal, and the modal tag helper, it's all of the simple things that you would expect it to be. You have a modal that has a header, that has a title, and then you have a modal body and you put whatever you want inside of that body. You don't need to remember any of the other things about dismiss attributes. You don't need to put anything else about how a dialogue might be constructed by Bootstrap or any other specifics. And then that way, again, as we went from 4 to 5, maybe there's going to be a 6, who knows? They make another round of changes, right? You'll be able to roll forward with those. And, you know, we even have a modal toggle just to make it really easy for you to be able to instantly handle targeting. Because that was another thing that changed from, you know, Bootstrap 4 to Bootstrap 5. It used to be data-toggle. Now it's data-bs-toggle. Well, you don't have to worry about that. You simply are setting that target, let the tag helper handle it for you. Makes it a lot easier. You know, the modals work as you'd expect them to.
And to clarify for our viewers, BS stands for Bootstrap.
Yes.
We did have a question here.
Good point.
We do have a question. So they're asking about tag helpers holistically, and they're saying, does it allow them to add custom attributes? So this is more of like the semantics, and they're curious if you can kind of dive into that a bit.
Yes, so you absolutely can. And that's where proper architecture of your tag helpers becomes really important when you're building them. But one of the things that we've done is we knew that we aren't going to get everything right for everybody all of the time. And so a tag helper, you can be additive to what's going on and allow anything that was attached to the element originally to pass through. So in our case, with some of ours, we built in specific things because we knew that you might want to customize it. So for example, we have a container class attribute that's optional that allows you to change that containing class. But you can add anything else that you want to, and it will be attached to that root element. If you have other arbitrary attributes that you want to add, you can do so. You can even add your own like CSS classes to it, and then the tag helpers will add their additional CSS classes on top of it. You know, you can rarely get into a conflict. It is also dependent upon how the developer of that tag helper implements it. So the biggest thing to be aware of with some of the larger structured tag helpers is they may be building that tag helper by nesting elements underneath it. So if you add an attribute, it's going to be in the wrapping class. Sometimes they build the tag helper by adding things before it and after it and around it. And in that case, your extra attributes may be added to an element inside. That's the only real thing you have to worry about with a tag helper and adding your own custom attributes to it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And so our Bootstrap 5 tag helpers in general, we tried to find, we went through the entire Bootstrap library and looked at the things that we use all over the place. And we tried to find those things that we are repeating on every single page or every single location across our application. And so we started to kind of figure out like which tag helpers made the most sense for us to implement. And so what we did is we started with alert, which displays the nice little alert messages. We've wrapped all of the different properties and attributes as well as the colors. So we can do, you know, an alert really simply here. We're not necessarily saving a ton. It's where we're future-proofing ourselves. We're making sure that if Bootstrap all of a sudden added a whole nother color or changed something, we can address that. We have the support for badges, which is something else that is part of the Bootstrap defaults. We have buttons. So Bootstrap has standard buttons, outline buttons, and those kinds of things. So we have a tag helper to go with that.
Can real quick, I just wanted to interrupt, and if you could scroll back up to badges, I just wanted to call attention to one thing. So the badge HTML element here, that's not an actual, like that element doesn't exist in the HTML specification. So this is, so is the badge element itself the tag helper?
Yes, in this case, the badge element itself is the tag helper. So it's a truly custom, same thing would apply here for alert as well, where it's a truly custom. It's not even rendered down to a badge at the end. This actually renders, if you look at what it comes out to in markup, it is actually a span.
A span with the class, sure.
Yep.
And that makes total sense. So that's what I was kind of getting at here is there's a bit of differences with how tag helpers are actually represented. In this case, it's more almost like a component.
Correct.
And then other tag helpers are like attribute based, where they can, I guess, declaratively differentiate how something is applied to an element.
Yes. So when you build a tag helper, you have the ability to essentially set a target element to it. So the link tag helper, for example, has a target element of A. So if you start typing a link, then you now magically get ASP-4 shows up because that tag helper was targeted to the A tag. In this case for badge, we didn't want to force you, because one of the biggest differences with badges, you may want it to be a span, you may want it to be something else. So we associated that to the tag badge rather than trying to tie it to anything else. And then we internally to the tag helper render it as a span or a div, depending on what your configuration is.
Right.
So,
I like that. That makes sense.
Yeah, as a developer, you have to kind of look at, if you're going to build your own tag helpers, you want to look at how you go and do this. The default examples I always give for people, the ability to do the hyperlinks with the ASP4, ASP controller, ASP action. Those are all those are a example of one that is targeted to a existing HTML tag, the anchor. The environment tag is a example of a Microsoft provided tag helper that is a custom element. And so one of the things that we did in our examples, and this is where, like, as a developer, if you want some examples of getting started, the documentation that was great, that was linked, is absolutely fantastic. But sometimes figuring out how to unit test these, how to build your own, becomes really hard. We use this tag helper library as an example as well for developers to just understand how I might build my own, because we are 100% unit, or we're at 99.9% unit test coverage for our tag helpers. So we have examples of what you have to do to unit test them and to get them working. So it's something that we really try to emphasize and make it a little bit easier. One of the biggest things that we did is we find that in like non-production environments, we love the environment tag helper, but what I really want to be able to do is I want to be able to quickly pop an alert to people that, hey, you're not on production. Or for certain people, maybe I should be alerting them that they're on production. I don't know. But we created an environment-alert tag, which is an extension of the Microsoft environment tag helper that simply renders a Bootstrap alert based on the same environment behaviors. So if you notice here, we actually use all of the same default behaviors of the environment tag helper that's included with by default, to be able to say, oh, exclude production. It's a warning. Hey, this is non-production. This again allows us to keep within that Bootstrap style, so it's neatly formatted, but it has all of the other out-of-the-box automatic environment behaviors to filter and show.
So that's really interesting, because that's like a conditional, based on the environment, a conditional thing that would be rendered.
Exactly.
It reminds me earlier in my career when I was a UI lead, sometimes before we would have the design team look at something, we would intentionally colorize it as like fuchsia to draw attention to it, to say, hey, this needs attention. But we do have another question here. And ironically, it somewhat relates to the painting and rendering of things. So they're asking, do tag helpers, help with the delivery of speed and the painting on the browser itself? And I know the answer. I just wanted to give you a chance, Mitchell, to respond to that.
I'll let you take that one.
Okay. So the answer is it doesn't have any impact whatsoever, because it's Razor is going to render that HTML, and before it even has a chance to do any painting, it's just served back as HTML. So the browser, like the client browser itself, is just going to see HTML, and it's not going to even know that there's tag helpers there, right? So it's not like the client gets these tag helpers and then the client's rendering it. It happens on the server, right? And then it just returns HTML. So the painting, the actual like browser event for the painting of those elements would be identical to any other like Bootstrap rendering that exists.
Yep. I would say, so one thing that I don't think we've talked about yet, and this is the real power in my mind, by using tag helpers, essentially what you're doing is you're using HTML markup to express processing that's happening on the server. So if you've ever looked at a view in your application and you notice these @Razor symbols everywhere followed by C# code, you would notice that you're kind of weaving in and out between HTML syntax and this C# with Razor syntax. You can eliminate all of that if you would like by using tag helpers in the appropriate way. And in fact, going back to a point earlier that Mitchell made, it was he touched on unit testing. If you wanted to create your own custom tag helper, there's a tag helper class that ships with ASP.NET Core, and you would just derive your own class from that. It's a C# class, and you could test that custom tag helper.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier from a developer perspective to know that we've got the permutations, and depending on how crazy you go, with that testing, right, you're validating the actual output markup, and it makes it a lot easier to just be able to know, yep, we're good and we meet the standard, especially accessibility standards. I've seen a lot of teams, right, they maybe miss an ARIA label here, an ARIA label there. You build that into your tag helper, it's there. For the one that was asking a little bit earlier about, I knew I had an example here somewhere, adding custom bits. So this example here, this is a card, and we have a custom class of BG Success, which gives it the green and text white. It's just the regular class attribute. It applies to it automatically. We don't really have to worry about anything special going on. So you can mix and match really easily. The key here is just kind of figuring out what makes the most sense. So what we did is, again, we took cards and dialogues. We did the progress component, which I thought was it's been a really fun one for us, to be able to make certain progress updates a little bit easier for my team to implement, as well as off canvas. This is one of the big ones that has become really popular in recent times. So you don't have to remember all of the different markup elements that you have to do to be able to get an off canvas working. You just use off canvas, and everything works pretty significantly easily.
And the benefit there too is like you see like the animations and all the things that would be applied with manually doing that through Bootstrap.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's where what we did is took and looked at all of the documentation. Okay, so if you do this, you add these classes. If you do this, you add this class. If you do this, you need to add this. Well, what we did is we took all of that and turned that into configuration elements for you. And so instead of you having to go back and look at the docs and make sure you get the markup right, we did it once and it's done everywhere. And I think that's that consistency, and it's sometimes the little things that are inconsistencies that you don't think about. One developer adds things and puts them in one order. Another developer adds them and puts them in a different order. That can have some longer term maintenance concerns when you go back to do things. And, so it's kind of the goal here was to make developer productivity a little bit easier. And the one other example that I have with this is we created a second set of tag helpers specifically for working with font awesome icons. because we found that we were doing one bit of markup so often with nullable types, where we wanted to show a value or show a font awesome icon if it wasn't populated. And I had some developers that would do it the really longhand way, where it was taking up like 6 lines of code every time. I had other developers that thought the ternary operator was just this most amazing thing ever. And I wanted to scream. So we created a separate set of tag helpers just to kind of show some of that power of what you can do with it. We created these font awesome ones for various types. So we have one for bool, int, decimal, date, time, and strings. And they're fairly simple in that it's decimal font awesome icon. I couldn't come up with a shorter name that made sense to not have any collisions. And you simply provided a value. If the value is null, it defaults to the font awesome minus icon. If you want to just do raw formatting with, you can. If you want to pass in a format string, you can pass in a format string. And you can even customize the icon that is shown when it's wrong. So like if this is missing, we can customize it. Instead of being a minus, we can have it be a red X or anything that you want to do here. And this is something that we use because of some of the design that we're doing. But the idea behind it was really to showcase from a developer productivity perspective, anything where you're doing that constant switching between Razor syntax, C# syntax, and I see it a lot. Tons of conditional if statements. Those are great concepts to potentially pull those into a tag helper. Oh my gosh. Just saw the comment come up.
It's like we've got a couple of children fighting there over ternary expressions. I feel like we've really opened a can of worms there. But we did have a question in the chat that I'd like to get to. If we pop that up, it's asking about IntelliSense code completion in the IDE. Could you speak to what that looks like in Visual Studio? If you've created a custom tag helper, does the IDE have any knowledge of that?
100%. It is absolutely supported. You get autocomplete so for example, anywhere in the Bootstrap ones where we have a color displayed, there's an enum value for the Bootstrap colors. You get IntelliSense completion of those values. If you are a good developer and you properly comment your code, your descriptions of what should go in there, you're using XML-based comments, all of those are visible. So 100% support in the IDEs. From Visual Studio's perspective, I don't know about VS Code, I guess. I assume it does, but I'll let one of you guys confirm.
Yeah, it does. It uses the same underlying semantic model.
I figured it did, but I was like,
I was going to ask though. So you mentioned as a good developer, if you have / comments, that's a thumbs up. Out of curiosity, is the / comments what drives the statement completion, or is there any when you're an author of a tag helper, do you have to put some additional metadata in there that says, hey, these are the possible things?
So it works basically, it's all based on objects for the most part. So if we go in and look at let's go at one that's an easier one to look at. So this is the source code for the badge tag helper that we have. And autocomplete IntelliSense is driven by the type. So in the case of high display being a bool, you're going to get the autocomplete of true false.
Got it.
In the case of our badge color here, we have an enum that is Bootstrap color. That's going to get you your autocomplete. So your real comment here with the / comments is really to drive that extra info that shows up in IntelliSense. Not as important for certain things, but for example, display as pill. Pills and Bootstrap, some people just don't understand what a pill is. So it's really nice to be able to give that extra description so that they know what true or false means.
Got it.
But the actual selection criteria is based on the class definition.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So it supports, is it just like primitive types? Oh, I know it does custom enums.
The most, for what I've done from an IntelliSense completion perspective, has been primitive types and enums. I don't know if there's much more that you really would be passing in
Sure.
at that scenario. I do know that one of the other things that is kind of nice if you look at the more complex tag helper scenarios. So, for example, the concept of a card, where a card then has a body, a header, and a footer. One of the things to the that question before was you can restrict children elements, and then that actually gives you build warnings, and you actually get them in the IDE so that people know how they're constructing. This does drive IntelliSense a bit as well. Exactly how, I don't know. I just know that it works. But in this case, for example, my card tag helper, I don't have it named specifically, so semantic naming kind of comes into play. Tag helper goes away, card becomes my target element. But then I say restrict children, and I say that I can only have card header, card body, card footer. If you put any other markup inside of that card tag, you're going to get an error. And that tag helper is not going to work. So it does make it really easy for you to control as a developer what they can do.
But to clarify, that's just for immediate children.
That is for immediate children. So then if we look at my card body tag, which my card body tag helper is one that goes under, I can do two things. One, I can set my target element to make sure I get my nice formatting. And then this is kind of a curious one, that your parent tag, I don't have to do this because I could use my card body anywhere else, right? But I do this from a developer convenience perspective. I would have no reason to use a card body tag if I wasn't inside of a card. So I set the restriction in both places. But now that I'm inside of my card body, I haven't set any restrictions below this. So now I can put anything I want underneath that card body.
So you could hypothetically do something, though, that might be a bit curious, like nested cards, which is probably frowned upon.
That should work just fine.
It should work, right?
It does.
Especially if they're different styles.
Yeah. It doesn't look the greatest if you don't change the styles, but you can nest them pretty far, and the Bootstrap layout actually helps them. So yes, absolutely. You cannot prevent developers from doing everything crazy. But it's definitely a way to be able to, guide them a little bit. By doing this, for example, with the parent tag being set, if you just type card body anywhere in your HTML, you're not even going to get, it's not going to light up in Visual Studio as a tag helper at all, which typically helps guide people a little bit.
We do have another question here. They're asking, does tag helpers work with Blazor?
So do you guys have a good solid answer for this? Because I've seen people using some stuff in Blazor, but I don't know if it's really, Blazor's a little different, and I don't have a solid answer on that.
Yeah, I'll chime in and say that.
David, what makes you an expert?
I wrote a book on Blazor. So, believe it or not, this wasn't really part of the scope of the book. I've never actually tried it. However, I think conceptually it would be possible because you can consume Razor components as a library external to your primary Blazor application. So I think in theory, yes, but within strict limitations and kind of as a hacky workaround. So I don't think it's supported as a first-class citizen of Blazor development. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can tell you I haven't tried that myself either. I've only used the tag helpers in MVC and Razor Pages applications where they work fantastic. I did want to dig into the code sample that Mitchell is sharing here. Viewers, you may have noticed there was a process method in the previous example. Process async is being used here. Mitchell, could you just speak to what the purpose of that method is?
Yes. So this method is where your actual processing of your tag helper is being done. And process versus process async, at least in my usage, I'm not 100% sure if this is per the documentation. But basically, process async allows me to ask for that child content and to let it render. And if I don't need to do that, I don't need to be async, was the biggest difference between the one that you saw before that we didn't have it and this one. But the idea here is this is where you're doing all of your work inside of the tag helper itself. So in a tag helper definition, you can set all of your parameters, anything that they need to be able to pass in. And the key here is when it's being processed, you're passed in the tag helper context and the output. And then in here, you're able to do all of the things that you need to do. So in my case, for example, card dash body was my tag, my HTML element name. In here, I can switch my output tag name from card dash body, which is what it would have been, to be a div. I can then add a class to it with whatever I want it to be. Now, this is one of the things, probably the biggest gotcha when I first started doing these. You can also do output class name. I think it's class name, or maybe just be output class. You can override and explicitly set the class, or you can choose add class. Add class allows somebody to add a custom class, and you will simply be adding to it. If you do it the other way, you're going to blow away anything that that individual may have set. So to that person who was asking early on about, can I add custom stuff? You absolutely want to use add class rather than forcefully setting the class, because you'll lose what the individuals did. And then we can go in here, for example, we want to get the child content and then append that into our content so that we are wrapping everything, because in our case, that's what we wanted to do. But this is where you're doing all of your individual processing of that element at that particular time. And tons of examples in the source code for this library of different types of tag helpers to be able to do it, especially the form ones where things got a little bit crazy because we're overriding or consuming multiple other tag helpers inside of it. So lots of good examples if you're looking for something to be able to go see.
I noticed for the card tag helper or the card body tag helper rather, you're specifying what the element name is. Is it possible to do something similar with the attributes on the tag helper? Can I define what that looks like in markup when it's used?
Yes. So I'm trying to think of there's an example in here somewhere. I think it may be the badge tag helper. I can't remember. But we actually, in a couple of places, we actually give a tag name property where we allow the individual to tell us how they want it to render. I think it's in this. Let me just double check. That's one that I don't have it in this one. But basically, there's nothing saying that you couldn't add, for example, another string property here, right? And let them choose the tag name. And then you could pass that in. Now, obviously, you got to be careful what you get. You want to make sure a developer provides you a good value. One of the things that we had thought of for that is we use modes more than anything to give the developers that flexibility. So we give them an enum when we can. Oh, I want it to be this way, or this way. And they have to choose one of those options. But you absolutely could bring that in from a parameter or some other outside source to be able to render differently as needed.
Got it. And I know one more question I had. I'm very curious. You mentioned unit testing earlier. Do you have a code sample you could share with folks that shows kind of what your approach is for testing one of these?
Let's see here.
Because as we saw earlier, there's that process or process async method, and I'm guessing at some point you would want to test that logic.
Yes, and so basically, what we've done is we created an abstract class, base class for our unit test that kind of we pulled a bunch of the stuff from the examples, and there's the good news is because for my own purposes, I want to remember what we did. Anything that we lifted as examples from the open source stuff that's out there, we have a link into the repository that we found it in. And I would also welcome any pull request suggestions of if there's an easier way of doing this than what we did, because I'm all ears. But the general concept is you need to create a context and an output to be able to pass into the tag helper. And then we build our tag helper and call that process method. And then we are able to investigate that output. So in our case here, this is a unit test for, hey, if I chose hide display, nothing should happen. It was really easy. And then down in this example for this one, for example, we wanted to do should render proper class. We're actually adding 2 classes always when we do this. So, this was a theory to basically run through all of our permutations of our enum and make sure that we got the right color. Now, in this case, we're actually then starting to wander into the output and look at the tag name, look at the individual attributes. Now, in a couple of our other examples, one of my developers had gone to actually comparing the rendered snippet to an expected rendered snippet. There's some pros and cons to that. Personally, this requires me to write a little bit more, but I get a much more granular failure. If my class is incorrect, I'm going to get a failure that says that my class isn't correct. If my markup is wrong, I just get a failure that my markup is wrong, and then I have to go figure out what's wrong. So I definitely have a love-hate relationship with a couple of ways that they've been done. But the idea here is you are able to fully exercise it without being inside of a web app at all from your unit tests.
Yeah, I just chimed in too here in chat saying that I think this is actually a really cool opportunity for Playwright because you've got the demo app site. So you could hypothetically, as part of your, you could spin up like a GitHub action that installs all the bits for Playwright and then have tests much like this that would then go interact with various DOM elements and test and make sure that not only, that's like a full end-to-end test. Make sure that, your site's up and it's got the latest bits there and all of your samples are doing exactly what you think they're doing.
And now I have something to research after this. Thank you.
Either that or David has found his next project.
No, I've already done plenty of that. That's cool. Awesome.
So I don't see any more questions coming through in the chat. Cam, David, did you have any other questions for Mitchell?
Nope.
All right. Well, then I think we can wrap up the show a bit early today. I'd again like to thank Mitchell for sharing his knowledge here about tag helpers. Hope the viewers found some nugget of information here and will start using tag helpers in their ASP.NET Core apps. As a reminder, you can check out recordings from other .NET Live TV streams like this one over at dot.net/live. Another reminder, we'll be taking a break from the show next week in observance of Independence Day. It's hard to believe that's almost here. You can catch us again, however, on July 10th. When Go ahead.
I just want to jump in real quick. If any viewers are interested, we will be hosting a Let's Learn Live event, actually talking about Razor and tag helpers. That will be this Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. That will be available here, I believe, on the .net channel on YouTube and the Visual Studio channel on Twitch.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, Cam. So again, catch us on this show July 10th. That's when we will return. Our friend Swami, who's been on the show before, will join us and talk about using gRPC web. Hope to see everyone then. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Wow.